Hello, everyone. This is Fahed from SeeThroughPanel. Just me today. Cole is busy doing young people stuff like university coursework. Bit of a different format this week. I'm going to be interviewing Joe Stone. Joe is a designer, writer, and artist living in London who's been releasing self-released published comics for about 3 years. The most well-known being his autobiographical comic Stutter, about what it's like living with a speech impediment. He's heavily involved with WIP Comics, which is a community of comic creators that meet once a month to share ideas and give each other feedback. Every year, the group releases an anthology. This year, they're splitting it up into 2 books on the themes of success and failure. The new books are going to be released on the 10th of October, featuring a combined total of over 30 creators across all experience levels, styles, and genre. First of all, Joe, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm all right. It's obviously a bit of a weird year for everyone, especially like this week when all the news has come about the potential kind of second lockdowny sort of stuff. So just when you think you're out of it, you get dragged back in again. So.
It drags me back in, just like the Godfather Part 3.
Exactly.
I've been kind of working a little bit on my interview technique, and a book I read recently says that it's always nice to start an interview off with a joke to help the guest relax. So I'd like to know if you'd like to hear a joke.
I absolutely would love to hear a joke, always.
Okay. So, how did Darth Vader know what Luke Skywalker got him for Christmas?
Oh, I think he felt his presence.
Yes. Oh, you've heard that one.
When it
Okay.
comes to Star Wars jokes, then I've got. That's a thing I have quite a firm interest in general. I don't know why.
Yeah. So, let's talk a little bit about the sort of the WIP and the kind of anthology.
Sure.
I'm not too sure how the WIP works, what its governance is. How did you decide upon the themes of success and failure for this year's anthology?
So I actually didn't decide that myself. That was it was kind of like we generally try to have a kind of group decision. I mean, with the group in general, then I do try to not necessarily be too much of a kind of a dictator in terms of how it functions and what we do. Although saying that, I think the title I've given to myself on like the meetup page, because we got like a meetup page is just how we organize all the actual groups. See, this is exactly what I was saying before about sometimes difficult to
Yeah.
record podcasts when you've got a speech impediment, which I find a lot when I do my own one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I try to not like necessarily like be too directly involved in these things. I kind of leave it up to the group to discuss it and decide on things. I occasionally try to like push people in the right direction. I think in terms of the ideas of success and failure, we wanted it because we this year doing 2 books rather than just one. The reason for that mainly being the last one was getting extremely large, and the amount of people who want to get involved means the book gets extremely big, and thus it costs quite a lot to print and then to buy or to sell to people. And the price was becoming a little bit difficult. So we thought by dividing it up into 2 smaller books, it might be more approachable for the audience. And so we wanted the themes that kind of worked as 2 sides of the same coin, essentially. So we thought they function particularly well in terms of someone's idea of success might kind of correspond quite nicely with someone else's idea of like from the failure topic, and how those 2 things kind of interact with each other, but yet still being able to be being kept entirely separate.
So, in terms of deciding which comics make it into an anthology, is that kind of a group decision, or is there like an editorial board, or kind of, is there kind of like because I'm kind of new to the process of making comics anthology, and I'm not really too sure about kind of what the process is in terms of, do you just accept the comics in as they come in, or do you suggest editorial changes to them? Kind of how does that process work?
Yeah, so with the group in general, then kind of the main structure of the group is that we get together once a month to actually discuss what we're working on and to share our work in progress. Hence the name of the group, WIP. So the anthology is working is that we choose the themes kind of towards the beginning of the year, and then we all work on things at the same time together, and then kind of share our comics as we're working on them with the whole group to get feedback, give each other ideas about how maybe they could develop it or maybe push it in the right direction. In terms of who's allowed in the anthologies, it's been pretty open in the past. I don't really have. I think there's a bit of a difficulty in the comic industry in general of getting your work out there, especially if you're a first time creator, you've never released anything yourself. I think that path to actually releasing something is quite hard. So part of the things I actually wanted to achieve with the anthologies and with the group in general is to give people the option to be able to get their work in print when they wouldn't have it in the past. So I don't really turn anyone away. Occasionally there have been comics which I think aren't suitable to basically be included in them because of their content, because of the subject matter, things like that. So that's kind of the only thing that would ever stop me from including someone's work in the book. But for the most part, the whole point of it is that the experience level doesn't matter. It's just about the idea of making comics and getting it out there to in the books is kind of the main the force behind that.
I think that's kind of a really interesting kind of point that you make. I've been kind of on the UK Comics Creator survey and just listening to the calls, listening to those seminar sessions in terms of it's really difficult to get your work out there. Producing comics is really, really expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And trying to convince a publisher that they should spend, the money on the colors or the inks and the paper and all this sort of thing when you're unproven is it's really, really challenging.
Yeah.
So just having something like this anthology giving creators of all levels an opportunity to experiment and get their work out there, I think something really important.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, that was kind of the driving force behind it in general. I mean, obviously the one thing that that divides it up from anthology books of the same kind of ilk is that ours is contained within the group, so you kind of need to sort of join the group in the first place, and then that's how you kind of get involved in it. But yeah, that's the one thing that stops people, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, sort of confession from me, I suppose. I've been in kind of the meetup group for several years now, but I've never actually have been to a meetup because it's just kind of I was a bit too intimidated to go, or you make up these sort of little excuses to yourself. I'm busy on Saturdays, which I didn't actually end up being. I used to teach a martial arts class on Saturdays, so it's just kind of it was difficult to get down. Is in South London, live in North London, is just kind of you give yourself these excuses. So,
fair enough.
The fact that it's kind of the WIP sessions are kind of online now, and due to COVID-19, I think for me, it's been I've attended a few more of those sessions now. So I was just wondering how running the WIP has been, and how sort of COVID-19 things, how COVID-19 has kind of affected things generally, and kind of what lessons you're going to be kind of taking forward from now on.
Absolutely. It's a good question. I mean, obviously this year has been full of hardships for everyone. The meetup group obviously was like an actual physical meetup group where we would all get together in the same place at the same time. And that was extremely useful for being able to kind of communicate with each other and just I think when lockdown first hit, I was kind of unsure about how exactly to do the group online. Even a Zoom chat, which is the way it works at the minute. I was kind of thinking that wouldn't work in the first place, because the thing I like about the group so much is the way that there's not really a structure for it. There's not really a kind of one talking point that we all talk around. We all kind of talk just about the work that we're working on amongst ourselves, and that was one of the things I liked about it. But because of the lockdown and the fact that wouldn't work on Zoom, then now that the focus has kind of changed to having a particular topic we talk about each month, basically, which I think actually has kind of helped in terms of keeping the focus a little bit more. I think like the fact that there's not. I mean, it's difficult. I think I miss the physical ones. I would like to go back to that at some point, but I think the doing it the way we're doing it now has got some benefits to it as well. But yeah, like obviously the whole year's been a particularly hard thing in terms of making comics for people, and I think that's the kind of the biggest thing that's affected everyone. Of not everyone's got the capacity to actually make that much stuff, or the will to do it. I think is the harder point of.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like just slowed things down. I think that's why the anthology books were particularly good as well. Is that there was like again like a focus, so something that kind of gave us a purpose to make something because we had like a particular time we wanted to get them finished for and stuff. So that definitely helped. But.
I know kind of what you mean. I've been struggling quite badly with my own sort of writing projects. Kind of, I've got 2 comics on the go at the moment, and I've kind of had to hand writing duties over to someone else on one of them because you don't have kind of the mental resources to kind of do the best work that you possibly want to do, especially if you're just a writer like I am. If you're working with an artist, there's almost this obligation to kind of give them the best possible stuff that you can, because illustrating a comic is so much work, and if you don't feel like you can kind of give that effort, then I think it can be kind of like emotionally quite difficult.
Absolutely, I think I mean, I've been working on a comic for the whole year so far, and it's taking me like much longer than I thought in general. Just in terms of, I think it is like a lot of it is that focus of I'm not in the right frame of mind to work in it at this particular moment. So I know that the work's not going to be as good as it would be if I was, and so that kind of makes me not want to do it. But then the more I don't do it, the more it becomes a kind of like the pressure to work at it again to make it really good. It gets like even more, and then I just don't do it at all because it's kind of like the fear factor, I guess, of I don't want it to not be up to my standards, but because of that, I don't work on it at all, and then it just won't get finished in general, and that's also a problem. So
I saw a kind of a meme that kind of hit home for me, and it's a scene from Friends where kind of Phoebe is saying to Joey kind of like finish the project you started.
Yeah.
And then kind of Joey's saying, start a new project. So that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Yeah.
Finishing the stuff that I've got, that I've got going at the moment is kind of, let me just start writing like a new thing there. But I think it's, for me, what I'm trying to do is just actually do just one page at a time. One page a day. And then
I think that's the
put it away, then you can fix it later on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing of like, I think that there is the pressure, but at the same time, I know that it's stupid. If I know that firstly, like, the things that I write or draw, it doesn't mean it has to be finished. I can always draw it again, but just to kind of get into the habit of working and making things, I think is such an important part of making comics in general. Once you kind of lose that habit, it can be quite hard to get back into it. So I think that's like the right approach is just to always be working on things, despite the fact that maybe they won't be your finest work. I think just the practice of making comics in general is such an important thing to kind of to keep doing.
Yeah, I think definitely kind of having those creative habits and having that discipline to kind of like write or draw something every day, I think is important. So you kind of already answered my next question, which was how your project's coming along.
I mean, it's quite hard.
And kind of, the next question I was going to kind of ask you about was how's the podcast been going? I know you've been doing the WIP podcast. You've had some really great guests on there, and how's that been impacted by the COVID-19 situation and kind of working on all these other projects that you've got going on as well?
Yeah, I mean, so that kind of came out of the COVID situation in terms of that was the first thing I thought of when the meetups couldn't happen in person anymore. I wanted to kind of those sort of conversations to keep happening, and like I was saying earlier on, I didn't think a Zoom chat would necessarily work, which obviously it does. I'm thankful to say, but at first I just couldn't quite work out ways to do it. So I thought the podcast would be a good alternative, just in terms of having that. The conversations about making comics, the conversations with someone about their process in particular, would be a really a helpful thing just for the group and for myself and for the wider audience who make comics around the whole world. And it's been a weird one. Like, in some ways, I do think that like starting a podcast, especially when you've got a speech impediment, is maybe not the best idea I've ever had. But it's been like an enjoyable process for the most part. And I'm gonna keep doing it. I've got more coming out soon as well.
How do you, because I knew you were doing like one a week, and I think it's gone to one every
fortnight
2
now.
weeks. So
Yeah,
so is that more manageable for you now?
Yeah, I think the one a week thing it seemed like a great idea at the time, and because I think at the start I was really want to going with it, and the first one was good, and I thought I'll just keep on doing more of these, and then as the kind of the more I did it, the more work I realized it was. And it's the same as working on the comics thing of like, I wanted it to be the best it could be. I didn't just want to do like a half-assed job with it. So I wanted to improve the production values a little bit. The guests just have a kind of wider selection, different sort of people on it. And a weekly schedule for that, as well as having a job and I gotta say seeing friends, but obviously I wasn't really doing that much over lockdown. Things like that, like I'm working on comics as well, obviously, and the meetup group and doing all that. There's like a fortnight schedule seemed more likely to be able to actually to do like a decent job with it. And I think that a lot of part of the podcast was also a good excuse for me to not have to work on my comics. It's just like I have something else to focus on. There was still like in like the world of comics, and still like I say, like a helpful thing for me in terms of my like the process of making comics, but without having to draw things, because that's hard.
I've actually tried to take up art myself, but when you've not drawn for like 30 years, it's kind of like it's hard going. I was just going to say, kind of like starting a podcast during kind of like lockdown is kind of a really cliche thing to have done. Yours is one of the good ones.
Oh,
I have to say so. Yeah. So and kind of what me and myself and Cole are trying to do, kind of do one episode a week, can be quite quite challenging, especially because he's based in the United States, and
of course,
getting the kind of like timings correct and deciding which books to do as well. We've not actually vetoed any a book the other one suggested yet, but I think that conversation's bound to happen. At some point. So I just want to go back to the anthology. I know you kind of slowly releasing the names of the people that are involved over social media. So I was just wondering if you can talk about some of the creators that you've already announced, and
let me
what they're doing.
Quickly look on my Instagram account to remember who I've already announced. I think like I say, the thing I like the most about the books is just the especially with them having those particular themes. It's the different way everyone's approached it, the different way everyone's kind of taken the theme and made completely their own stories about it. They're not like I think like I like saying at the start, the idea of success to someone is completely different as it is to someone else, and I think that just the amount of different ways people have managed to approach it are particularly good. I think these are probably the best books we've done so far, because we've done them for the last 2 years as well. So these are the third and fourth book that we would have done together, and I think they're probably just like the quality of them is the highest it's been so far overall. I don't know why that is particularly, but I think that the work there is just I would take particularly good this year. I mean, in terms of people who've been out so far, so we got Nikki Benadas, who's extremely good. Christopher Hazeldine as well. His one's extremely funny, extremely well drawn. We've got some more coming up. I think the next one that's going to be announced is me, who's very good at making comics. That was definitely one to watch out for. That one was fun to draw for me as well. So, I mean, I don't want to talk too much about them because obviously we've got some surprises coming up in terms of the lineup and stuff we've got. But yeah.
So I'm going to kind of ask a few hacky, cliched questions now, but I think they're probably worth going through. What are your first memories of reading comics, and kind of what are your inspirations for starting to write and create and draw comics as well?
I think I've always kind of been drawn towards art, drawing things particularly, and telling stories in general, even ever since I was a kid. I think the first comic I ever read was X-Men issue 5, which was the one from. I think that one came out in 1993. I think it was when I was about 6 years old. So that was my first kind of portal into comics. And I think like seeing the costume design and like the characters in there and the colors and just the excitement drew me in. But like, and I've basically not been able to shake the habit of enjoying comics since then. In terms of being kind of driven to make my own comics, it's just one of the things I've always done basically since I was a kid. Like there's always been some kind of idea for a story in my head, and I've always wanted to draw things. So I've always sort of made comics since I was young. But now I've got a job and a computer, and I can make them look nicer. So I can make them to a decent level, hopefully. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a thing that I kind of feel like I couldn't not do to some degree, which is a kind of weird answer, I'm sure. But I think, it's just such like a natural process to me in terms of if I've got an idea for something, the first thing I think of is would it work as a comic? Can I like tell the story in a comic? And so I can't not make them because of that, basically.
Okay, that's really it's a lot different from what it is kind of for me. Kind of,
Yeah.
I only really started creating, writing. I never thought that someone from my kind of background that creating comics would be for me, and it was just by chance by meeting an artist online that liked the stories that I was kind of pitching to him.
Right.
That I decided to kind of take it a little bit more seriously, and yeah, I still have that kind of anxiety about does anyone want to read this, or is this just for myself, or
Yeah.
is this just an ego ticket, and all those different perhaps not very helpful kind of mental games that we play on
Yeah.
ourselves in
I mean,
terms of
I think that's extremely common. I think that's like the thing that I hear the most from people who want to make comics is that no one's going to want to read this. Why should I make it? And I guess my advice to you and to everyone who's listening on that front is that it doesn't matter if anyone wants to read it or not. If it's there, people might read it, but if it's not, they definitely won't. So I think that
yeah,
the idea of it's like you if you've got the idea for it, I think you should just make it. And if anything, it's a healthy process to get the idea out of your head onto paper or onto a screen or however you make your comics. And then you haven't got to worry about it anymore. And I also think in terms of the fear factor and the idea of am I doing it just for myself, or am I doing it for anyone else? That's also fine. Like you can do it just for yourself, and that's still a reasonable thing to do. You don't have to sell them. You don't have to show them to anyone. You can just make them just for the sake of making them. And then if you do show someone and they tend to like it, that's a good thing, I think.
yeah. One of the things that I've been doing a lot during kind of like lockdown, and even kind of before lockdown, was going kind of on Reddit and the Tapas forum,
Yeah.
the Reddit Comics Collab forum, and the Tapas forum, and kind of pitching ideas to writers that were to artists that were looking for writers. And you read pitches from writers looking for artists, and they're pitching these kind of like 400-page graphic novels,
Mm.
and it's just kind of like the thing in my head is that I would eventually like to write something that long, but I think the best analogy that I've heard was that writing is like it's like sparring, in terms of you need to put the rounds in the gym,
Yeah.
in terms of like testing out ideas and testing out techniques before you go into a professional fight, which might be your 400-page graphic novel. You don't want to be kind of figuring out how to create interesting dialogue or script the flow of a story while you're doing that. You want to have already had that figured out once through writing smaller stuff and
Absolutely.
smaller collaborations. So yeah, so I don't know what your is that something you'd be perhaps interested in terms of writing a longer graphic novel? I know you've already had a few things published already, but is that something kind of in the back of your head, kind of you figuring out how you're gonna craft something longer than that?
Not really, to be honest. Like, I think I've
Yeah.
definitely got ideas for stories that are potentially a bit longer than the ones I've been doing in the past or so far up to this point. But in terms of I think that it's such a common thing of quite often it's for people's first projects as well that they want to do the 400-page science fiction epic, the beast of a book. And I think that it's firstly, comics take a very, very long time to make in general. Even short ones can be extremely time consuming, depending on the level of detail you want to go into in terms of the art and the writing and the whole process, and it's tweaking it to get it right to the point that you want it to be. And I think that the most satisfying feeling in the world is finishing things, especially when it comes to making comics, and just like that feeling of I've just finished doing the last drawing of the last panel of the last page, and that's done now. And now it's a thing that's actually complete and finished. I can send it out to people, or I can keep it to myself, or whatever. But I think when you've got like the huge task of doing a really, really long book, then that goal is so much further away, and the satisfaction of finishing things is going to take a very long time to get to, and I find that quite daunting. And also, I like kind of short form comics. I think that especially with those longer things as well, people do have the tendency to fill them with nothing.
Oh yeah, there's a comic that we reviewed recently. Should I name it? Well, we already released the episode. It's called Lord of Cosmos, and
that's
it was just. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like you've got to. Writing is editing, and you need to kind of
absolutely
make sure that you start as close to the end as possible, and
exactly. I think you need to have something achievable, and I think that there's a danger of you kind of people want to do things that are really big for the sake of them being big, rather than for the sake of them being good. A quantity versus a quality sort of situation, I guess. But for me personally, like the more focused a story is, and it often works better in a shorter story. That the focus of it means that you can actually get to the point much faster. You can tell the story you want to tell much faster in a more focused way, and it works better overall. I mean, I think saying that, like, I would definitely, like I said, I've got ideas for slightly longer form stories, but I don't think I want to do anything more than 100 pages. Probably be the absolute maximum.
Yeah.
I'd ever. Also, just in terms of, like I said, the amount of work, because I draw around and write, and I do it all myself, and all the coloring, and I'm a complete control freak as well. So I really want everything to be perfect, and I don't want to get any help from anyone, and I want every single line to be there, placed exactly where I want it to be. So for me, it's a very time-consuming process in general. So the longer the project, the more intimidating it is, and the less excited I am about doing it, and the less I think I'd be willing to make it into like a high-quality product.
Let me ask you kind of like my next question. I think we're already kind of touching on it a little bit already. What is your process when you create comics? Do you start off with a script, or do you start off with penciling some panels? How does that work?
I mean, it kind of varies a little bit depending on the story and on the project I'm working on. For the most part, I tend to plan things out as much as possible, and I've got a horrible habit. I tend to think about an idea for like a really, really long time before I even start to put like a single word in a script, or the first line on a page or anything. And when I say a long time, like 6 months to, I think the longest amount of time I've ever been thinking about a comic before I started it was about 2.5 years. Of just like, I had the idea in my head, but I felt like it wasn't quite fully formed enough to even start working on. So I just kind of keep on going, taking that idea and going round and round and round in my head, trying to focus it, making some notes occasionally, just like trying to to type out the basic, the beats of the story, or the basic points of the plot, things like that. And once I kind of got to that point, I say it varies depending on the comic about whether I want to do a script or not. For the most part, I will do a loose script, like kind of like a loose outline that's got some dialogue, but not necessarily like a full description of what's going on in the panel, because I'm going to draw it anyway. I kind of don't need to give myself that, unless there's anything particularly that I think of that I think I might forget about later. So for the most part, yeah, it's quite a loose script. Then I kind of do like large thumbnails. So the size of the actual comic page, I will sketch out just the placement of characters, the layout of the panels, the composition of the page, and then eventually start drawing it in pencil, and then do the lettering, and then start. And normally, this is when everything changes as well. So from the original script, this is when I'll change basically the entire script once I start actually typing it or writing it into the comic itself, into the finished product. Just in terms of thinking about the flow of things, the pacing of stuff. Then I'll start to do the pencils, then I'll do the inking, in which I'll normally change the entire thing again. So when the inking process happens, then a lot of the pencils I'll just completely ignore and just draw something entirely fresh on top of that. Which again is it's such the benefit of being able to do it all yourself is that you can kind of make those decisions on the fly. You don't have to consult with someone else, and sometimes definitely for me, then you kind of can't see the bigger picture until you've started working on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can understand that completely. Actually, one of the things that I've been kind of like doing a lot recently with my writing is I've actually started lettering the pages myself. So I'll kind of roughly draw like a 6x6, a 6-panel page, and then I'll just kind of letter it just to see if my dialogue fits inside the page. So I can definitely get that, because when you're writing it down, sometimes you can't actually see the visual impact that your words are going to have on the space and how much space they're taking. And I found that quite a useful kind of exercise for myself. So actually seeing the whole thing is something I definitely can kind of understand.
Yeah, no, I think like even just quite often what I'll do to go beyond that is once I've laid out all the pages alongside each other, I might change the order of some of the pages, again, depending on the story. If obviously the dialogue gets broken up, then that wouldn't work. But quite often I in the kind of comics I tell, that I can actually like move things around enough, or just insert things that weren't there before or afterwards, just to kind of to add more pages into it, to bulk out. If I think a scene feels particularly rushed, that it needs something at the start, then I can just like insert a little bit before that. My kind of approach to making comics in general, in terms of the kind of style of comics I make, then I try to use, again, it's different from story to story, but I try to use as few words as possible. And when I can tell the story just through the art, I'll do that. Because I think
it's a visual medium. That's what
exactly. It's a visual medium, and I think the best comics are the ones where the art and the writing are kind of doing the same thing at the same time, which is one of the things that's kind of hard to explain, I guess, but by exactly what I mean by that. But I mean, one can't exist without the other. You need the art to support the text, and you need the text to support the art. And if you can read the words without looking at the pictures and it still makes sense, then I think that's maybe not ideal. In the kind of comics I want to tell, I want you to have to look at the expressions on the characters' faces and what's going on with their pose and the backgrounds. I want that to kind of be just as important as the words and the dialogue and the narration and things.
Yeah, I recently finished reading Rusty Brown.
Oh yeah,
and
it's amazing.
It's an amazing book, but I found it also incredibly frustrating in bits as well, because that thing what you're saying about kind of the words and the pictures working together. Now, I've not necessarily got the worst eyesight in the world, but there were pages and panels in that book where I was really squinting to read what he'd written down, and some of the experimental way that he'd lettered the book. I found it quite difficult to follow the flow of the story. So it's kind of
I completely understand that, but at the same time, like for me, that was actually
it's a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece, but it's just
that was one of the things I actually personally liked about it. The fact that it was a challenging read. It wasn't just a straightforward narrative from beginning to end, and all the dialogue like happens along it. That I had to work to get through it, and it kind of made me feel more engaged with it to some degree. I was looking so hard and focusing so hard on following things that I was more like immersed in the story.
And the book itself manages to create some of the most powerful emotional moments I think I've ever kind of encountered, really, kind of, especially with the last story. I mean, there's the panels in there, just, I was on the verge of tears. Anyway, kind of just based off your experience from running the WIP and writing comics, is there anything that you wish you knew about creating comics that you know now that you wish you knew kind of like back when you kind of started your
Um,
journey?
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think you touched upon it a little bit earlier on, but the cost thing is something that you kind of don't really consider. When you think you want to start making comics, you've got a good idea, and you start drawing it or writing it, whatever. You can then get to the point when you finished it, and you're like, okay, now what do I have to do? If you want to get it out to an audience, you normally have to pay for the printing yourself in the first place. For the most part, obviously not everyone will. You can get to publish and stuff like that fairly early on, but especially when you're starting out, if you want to kind of get in front of people, if you want to get in front of an audience, then it can be very expensive. Tabling at comic fairs, there's almost always a cost associated with those as well, whether it's the table cost or the getting yourself to the comic fairs, things like that. To actually make a like a decent name for yourself and get your work to the widest audience possible, you have to invest quite a lot of money. And I'm very fortunate that I've got a job which allows me to be able to do that off my own back. And obviously, I do sell comics that then make some of the money back, so it kind of recoups it. And for the most part, I think I've probably not lost money making comics, but I wouldn't say I've made much just because of the amount of cost that you had to go into it in the first place. I think that's something that people don't really talk about very much. I think it's such an important issue it can be a turnoff for some people. What the counterpoint to that, I guess, would be you don't have to spend that much money if you don't want to. There are other ways to get around it. But in terms of books, I wanted to have my comics on tables at comic fairs, and so the route that I took into it definitely ended up being quite expensive.
Yeah, I was listening onto the UK comic creators seminars that they were running, and like I've got a question here. It says the UK Comics Creators Survey, depressing, isn't it? But kind of what it I volunteered at a theatre for a while, and what kind of the experiences that people were sharing very much reminds me of kind of jobbing actors and writers, jobbing writers and actors heading up to something like the Edinburgh Fest, and kind of investing massive amounts of money in the kind of like not the hope of getting discovered, but in terms of having the hope of their work reach a wider audience. And that for me is that similarity for me was quite striking.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's not a problem that's exclusive to comics by any means. Like the arts in general, any kind of pursuit where you want to create something off your own back and show it to other people, whether it's music or theater or comics or art, as in like the fine art kind of world, you kind of basically have to start from nothing and you have to work incredibly hard. And there is a lot of cost associated with doing that, even if in terms of the amount of time that you spend making comics that you could be doing something else that could be earning you money or whatever. I think, it's no matter what the creative pursuit is, there's always, it's very difficult to make it. It's very difficult to actually build the audience, and it does require a lot of hard work. But also what I've learned, I guess, is that if you stick with it and if you keep working on things and if you've got ideas and you make them, people will be interested in them. Even if you're not necessarily fully confident or you kind of think that they still need work, you'd be surprised that you're not that great is someone else is amazing. And I think if you don't make it, then like I say, those comics would never exist and no one would ever get to experience the stories that you've thought of or I've thought of or whatever.
Yeah. And I think if lockdowns shown anything at all is kind of how very, very important stories are
Absolutely
to people. Can people turn to kind of like Netflix, BBC iPlayer, all the books for comfort and guidance and all this sort of thing, and it's important work. I mean, that's a Ponzi thing to say, but it's important work.
I think absolutely right. These things are really, really important to a lot of people, and I think that not only the people who consume them at the end, but the process of making comics to me is a massively important thing. Like I mentioned earlier on, like I kind of feel like I have to do it. I feel like it's such a part of who I am these days, especially that I can't just stop. I couldn't just be like, I'm done with comics and walk away from it. I think that would be too difficult for me to do. It's such a part of who I am, and it's such an important way of me communicating the things I want to talk about, the stories, the ideas I've got, the characters I have living inside my head, and things like that. That despite maybe not being as productive over lockdown as I might have been in the past, being able to have that time that I can dedicate towards making comics has been extremely important to me during this year. And I think like the WIP group, bringing it all back around to the anthologies and having the focus of being able to help everyone else get their work out. It's been such an important part of the things this year for me as well. So,
yeah. Just a final 2 or 3 questions. In terms of, I think we sort of touched on it briefly. Kind of, what do you think the future of comics are? Do you think it's going to be digital platforms like Comixology or Tapas or these other things, or do you think print's still going to play a major part? And yeah, what you're such a wide question, but what do you think the pressing concerns for the future of comics at the moment?
I mean, I think that print is always going to be an important part of comics. I think that there's a tangible aspect to them that is so nice, and I think that digital comics definitely going to increase, and the amount of digital comics you can get, and the volume of them, and the access of them, is definitely going to keep on increasing, which I think is a good thing in terms of it means you can get more work out to more people. Yes, the audience can be wider if it's more accessible. But yeah, I don't think that print will ever go away. I think that such a big part of the comic scene in this country, particularly London, particularly the small press scene, I think, is the community aspect and the idea of the comic fairs, comic meetups, things like WIP are very important to a lot of people. And I think that the idea of having the physical books to kind of actually to use that as a linchpin to kind of hold these people together, I think isn't something that's going to go away anytime soon. Obviously, this year it's been very difficult to meet up and to have comic fairs and things like that. But I think that that's not something that's ever going to go away. I think there's always going to be a community who want to engage with a physical thing in a physical space with their friends, with their peers. And that won't change anytime soon, I hope, at least.
Yeah. I went, I think, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I went to a digital comic emporium. It was for the launch of Electro Comics, which was kind of Alan's Moore kind of attempt to kind of explore how you can use digital technology to tell comics. And
yeah,
the one thing that I kind of took away from that really is that we're not really exploring what the comics format can do kind of with this digital technology. And one of my frustrations, especially is, when I'm reviewing advanced review copies from NetGalley or Edelweiss, is that they'll just send you a PDF that's blatantly designed to be a print comic, and they've not actually thought about how someone's going to read that kind of like online, and they'll have these beautiful 2-page splashes kind of like cut off.
Yeah,
it's just like, well, that's kind of, what's the flipping point in that? So I think if digital comics are going to reach their full potential, you need to kind of specifically create for that digital.
Absolutely, I agree with that entirely. I think at the minute it's still like predominantly a print format, and even the PDF digital copies are just a kind of another version of that print format. I think the idea of comics being able to change, being able to morph into something that is more interactive potentially, or just can work in a different way online or on computers or devices in general. I think that's great. I think that could be really, really interesting. But I also think that the same could be said about the print forms, about books. I think there are certain things that work in books so well, like the page turn. When you've got a page turn and there's like
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
a shocking twist. That is so hard to get when you're just going through a PDF. But in a book, you're the one who actually has the action of turning the page and like showing the image, and it's such a satisfying feeling. It's such a kind of exciting part of books in general. And again, that's not just limited to comics, but to print mediums in general. There's always things that they've kind of learned over years and years and years of existing, the best ways to make the use of those formats.
Yeah,
digital comics will definitely get to that point eventually, I'm sure. But at the minute, I still think that they're on the back foot of they are just another version of the print form.
My friend's podcast, You Wrong Words, they review well, they don't review books. They talk about books a lot, and kind of one of the main things that they, both the hosts mention is kind of like, the smell of books and kind of the actual tactile touch of turning the page on a paperback or a hardback is not something that is easily replaceable.
Absolutely.
Really. So last two questions really. Are there any comic books that you're looking forward to reading in the future? Is there kind of any future titles that you've got your eye on that you'd be excited to get your hands on?
I mean, I've got a stack of books that I bought recently that I haven't got around to reading. JP's One Story. That's one that I got in Gosh Comics London not too long ago. That looks fantastic. It came out like last month, I think, and it looks the artwork's incredible. But yeah, I've not managed to find time to read it yet.
Yeah, that kind of leads on to my next question. Is there anything that you're reading or watching or listening to that you'd like my listeners, the audience, to kind of like know about, that you feel should kind of get that you're particularly enjoying, or that you think more people should be kind of aware of?
Yeah, so I'm really bad at TV and films. If anything, actually, over lockdown, I've really struggled in terms of watching things. I don't know why, because normally I'd be really into watching films. I was never necessarily that big on TV, but I've had quite a hard time with like keeping my attention, I think, on films and TV, things like that. In terms of comic books that have just come out, or about to come out, there's One Place This Road Ever Ends Up. I'm saying the name of that wrong, I'm sure. Yeah, there's One Place This Road Ever Ends Up. David Biscop's new book that comes out next week. I think September 30th, and that book's extremely good. You should get a hold of that if you can do. It's extremely good story that I got to look at a little bit before it came out, which is exciting for me. So yeah, that one I definitely have a look into if you can. Yeah, like I say, I'm bad at consuming stuff. Even when it comes to comics, I've been a little bit behind. Like I say, I bought a big stack of them over lockdown, and I've read one thing. That's about it. So yeah, that's more or less it at the minute, unfortunately.
Okay, cool. I'd like to thank you for coming. And my kind of last question is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't? And is there anything else you'd like to say?
I would like to say that you should buy the copies of the WIP Comics anthologies, which are coming out on October the 10th. Get them on wipcomics.co.uk, which is wipcomics.co.uk. They're really, really good. The quality work, like I say, is extremely high this year. People should definitely get a hold of a copy if you can, if you want to. Listen to the podcast as well if you're interested in hearing me talk about comics even more, which comes out every fortnight. The next one's going to be this week on Friday, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
That's great. Thank you very much. I was going to call you Doug there. Thank you very much, Joe. It's been a real pleasure.
Cool.